All right, so I'm going to make a quick video on some features that we didn't cover on the Seymour software from Automation Direct. This is for HMI touchscreens. So I'm going to assume you watched our previous video where we introduced this and talked about PLC communication. So I'm just going to dive straight into it. And if you're lost, please go watch the previous video from our regular meeting where we talked about how this works. So first things first, fire up the software, and then we're going to go File, Start a New Project. You can save this wherever you want. I'm going to call this Demo Screens. And then you need to pick the panel type. We have the T15 CLR. And then communication protocol for the PLC. For us, this is going to be Click Ethernet. Okay. In reality, this actually probably doesn't matter much if you're just running in simulation mode, which is what I'm going to show you today. But if you're making projects for the Chem-E-CAD class, ultimately you want to make sure and do this option and actually set up the IP address for the PLC for communications, which is all in our documentation. Email me if you have questions. Okay, so you hit OK, and by default, it's going to pull up this default screen. It's all sized appropriately. It's all pretty. So what I want to show you, what we covered previously, is setting up tags for PLC communications. But the cool thing is, in this, you can add internal tags as well. And so instead of being used to communicate with the PLC, this is used to communicate internally with the HMI. And so all this is it functions the same as tags you would use to communicate with the PLC, but it's not available for the PLC. So you can name this whatever you want. I'm going to name this push button. And you can see here, I'm adding a tag for this push button, which is a discrete memory type. If you go to the tag manager, you can add other tags. We'll do that in a minute. Okay, so that tag's added. It's discrete. It's read write, and it's not being used. Okay, cool. So that's available. It's assigned to this push button. This push button looks pretty good. The only thing I'm going to do is change this to off, and then I'm going to add a label to it. That's just a toggle option here for push buttons. I'm going to hit OK. All right, now I'm going to add an indicator light. And you can see why I added the label on the push button, because these basically look the same in this software unless you were to change it. So I'm going to add a label on the indicator light here, and then I'm going to go add a tag. What am I going to add? I'm going to add that tag I created earlier called push button. Okay, so now that push button tag is now associated with this light. So if I go into File, Simulation, this lets me test my HMI code. So you can test things like navigation and all your push buttons and everything using this. This is just a super simple little demo, but what it does is it pulls up a simulation screen of the screen you just programmed, and then it also pulls up this simulation window that gives you all kinds of data about what's going on. And you can see here it lists all the tags you've created. It doesn't list the default system tags automatically. So what do I want to use this for? I want to click the push button and turn it on. And you can see when I did that, this indicator light turned on and the tag value changed. Okay, and I'm going to turn this off, and you can see all that turned off. So this is super cool for when you're just starting out learning how these touch screens work, testing functionality. You can run this all in simulation without having a PLC ready or available to you, right? So the one thing you can't really test is your tag communication with the PLC. But assuming you know how to set that up correctly, which you should at this point, you can test whatever functionality you want, because in theory, right, you would set up this push button tag to write something in the PLC, and then you would set up another tag from the PLC to write back to this indicator light. And so when you're running in simulation mode like this, you're going to have less tags probably than you would if you were doing HMI to PLC communications. But you can test and make sure that your functionality works correctly, right? So I'm going to end this simulation, and then the last thing I want to do is, if you'll bear with me, if you go to the tag name database, I just want to show you you can add other tag types. And so if you remember earlier in this video, there was a pretty short list of tags, and that's because we were working with a push button, which has a discrete value of on or off. It was only showing all the discrete tags in the system. Whereas if you look here at this tag database, there's quite a few by default already assigned in the system. Okay, so I'm going to minimize this again. So if I want to add a tag, and I'm just doing this directly in the tag database management field instead of adding a tag for a specific item on our screen, you can see there's all the memory types available. So if you're doing something for, like a motor speed or a tank level or something like that, you'd probably want to make that a floating point, 32-bit, or maybe like a signed integer, depending on your application. So floating point lets you do decimals. Integers have to be integers. You know all this. So just be thinking about what memory type you need to use. But you can create any type of tag that you would use for communicating with a PLC in this way, and then you just make it an internal device, rather than making it a dev device. So this dev 001, if you remember, that's our PLC. So if you make it internal, it cannot be accessed by external devices like your PLC. You can only self-reference within the HMI. But again, for testing purposes here, you want to make sure you're making it internal, because if you make it external and it's a writable bit of memory, if you were to make this associated with dev1, well, now you can't internally reference this because you're not actually connected to the PLC. So the status of that bit actually won't update, right? So the other thing is, I think it's generally probably best practice not to internally reference external memory or memory that's also externally accessed. You would want to look at the status of something in the PLC that's being changed by a tag on this HMI, and not so much like reference that tag both internally and externally, if that makes any sense. I'm getting off in the weeds and probably talking a little bit about out of school about things that I'm not really an expert on. So feel free to disregard what I just said. It doesn't really matter in context of why I'm making this video, which is just so that you know how to make a simulation and test it, which after watching this video, you should now be able to do. So I'm going to end this and go assign some homework. Hope you have fun with this.